Hello, WeeklyTrek listeners. Your intrepid host, Alex Perry here, just to let you know that we recorded this episode before Sunday's release of the trailer for Star Trek Lower Decks, so I'm afraid there is no discussion of the trailer in this week's episode, but we will have a full breakdown and reaction to that trailer in our next week's episode. Hope you enjoy. Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on July 9th, 2020, and is current through Star Trek Picard Season 1, so beware of spoilers. Alright, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 6 television shows in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and my guest this week is returning guest and shore leave co-host right here on the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. It is Marina Kravchuk. Marina, welcome back to WeeklyTrek.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me back. It's always fun to talk about the Star Trek news, which thankfully we always have plenty.
Oh, yes. Well, Marina, I want to know something that's got you feeling excited about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
Well, there's so much stuff happening online, and that I almost find myself sort of faced with the daunting task of how to fit everything in my normal week, considering that, thankfully, work is still thankfully going, and, there's other stuff that occupy my attention, certain things for general education and things with my family. And then there's still Trek. I mean, we thank goodness for all these virtual events that we have, the Q&As and the trivia games and this and that and the Hangouts. So that really, I look forward to, generally most of the stuff tends to happen around weekend. Friday, Saturdays are quite busy, seeing that I'm literally stuck at home moving between that sofa and that bed.
Yeah, right.
But it's still a pretty busy week on an average week.
And did you tell me that just a couple of hours ago you were doing some virtual panel with Casey Biggs?
Yes, he and the Paso Robles Wines did a virtual hangout, basically talking about, the wines, of course, and they were partaking, which was very interesting to observe, and just generally talking about the company, generally talking about the wines, and of course touching upon what Casey Biggs does. He's the Paso Wine man, which he's mentioned before, both in Vegas and the other conventions that he made appearances at, because he's kind of became sort of like a face for the whole thing, and it's a lot of fun. So you can just go on YouTube, type in Paso Wine Man, and a whole bunch of these commercials will pop up, and a lot of them are quite funny.
Casey Biggs, who obviously, for anybody who's listening who doesn't know, played Damar in Deep Space Nine, is a very dapper gentleman. He's a very good-looking guy,
and a connoisseur of wine too,
a connoisseur of wine and high culture. And I had something else I was feeling good about Star Trek this week, but I'm going to tell this story in lieu of it because it's Casey Biggs related.
Oh.
He and I shared a cab back to McCarran Airport in Las Vegas after STLV, and I want to say it was 2014. It was the morning after the convention. Everybody was on their way to the airport, and I'm standing with my wife in the cab line, and who sort of walks up behind me is Casey Biggs, and I can't remember who it was who ultimately started the conversation. I think it was probably him, because I probably would not be the kind of person to, just sort of strike up a casual conversation. I know normally better than that and to leave the actors alone. But I think we chatted for a bit as we were waiting for a cab. He asked if we were also going to the airport, and then he suggested we go together. So, I was like, sure thing. I could spend a little more time with Casey Biggs. I'll do that. We had a very delightful conversation about his wine work and some theater he was trying to get investors to fund up in California. And then the best part of the whole thing was, not only did I get 15 minutes to talk to Casey Biggs in about whatever we wanted to, when we reached the airport, he paid for the cab. So I got a free cab ride to the airport with Casey Biggs. So my memory of that is what's got me feeling good about Star Trek this week.
Yeah. Well, but overall, it's exciting and sad that we have all these memories about the physical conventions, but at the same time, we still do get quite a lot of content happening virtually, thank goodness.
Yes.
I mean, I started keeping track in the form of a list of all the events that catch my attention, and I started kind of sharing it because a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, how do you even keep track of who's doing what, who's reciting? It's not necessarily like strictly Trek events. It's just, we all kind of start following Trek actors or creatives in what other projects that they do. So it kind of becomes, I suppose, associated with Trek. And so I'm, somebody's doing something. I'm like, oh, it's a Trek associated event because it features this and that actor, But yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening. Something else to kind of point out, because especially folks who are big DS9 fans should be aware of this. Andrew Robinson and Alexander Siddig are currently doing a series of it's a single web play, but they're doing it in chapters. I think there's 4 chapters total. They already premiered 2 of them, and they do it online as part of the Zoom hangout that Siddig has twice a week, every week. And you gotta check this out. I mean, eventually the recorded version gets put down on I believe it's Sid City, Siddig's fan club. Their YouTube channel eventually posts the recorded version, and it's so much fun. I saw the premiere of the first episode, and it was like, oh my god, it's Bashir and Garrick talking in Zoom right there in front of me. So yeah, that's a fun one. But there's so much stuff happening online. It's exciting.
I actually did not know they were doing that. I will have to go and check it out.
Yes, it came out of. Well, I cannot unfortunately make it to every single hangout that he does, because some of the times I'm actually still working. Like Fridays is early afternoon enough that I'm still at work, but I do try to get in and listen, because lots of interesting fans, and it's a pleasure to see Siddig really enjoying interacting and engaging fans. And then this thing came up saying, it's like, oh, there's going to be a performance. And I'm like, well, I have to catch it to see what it is. It's written by, I believe the gentleman's name is Matthew Campbell, and he's a fan. And it's wonderful. It's like this, it does feel connected to, well, DS9, obviously, to that imagined 8th season that we kind of touched upon in What We Left Behind documentary.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it's somewhat, I suppose, to Picard, because some of the stuff that gets mentioned it feels like it's part of that much later on time that we're now dealing with in sort of this post TNG era. So it's definitely check it out. It's Zoom is generally open to everyone. The only limitation is, I think, I'm not quite sure which version of Zoom they're using, but there's definitely a limit on how many people can get in. So if you want to do it, make sure that you're sitting with your finger ready in order to click the link and get into the waiting room.
All right, well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
So our top story this week is we now know the plans for San Diego Comic-Con Virtual Edition and Star Trek. So even though San Diego Comic-Con will not be happening in person this year, many studios and production houses are still preparing content for the virtual San Diego Comic-Con at home, and Star Trek is no exception. The Enter the Star Trek Universe panel will take place on Thursday, July 23rd, beginning at 1 p.m. Eastern. I have a 2 p.m. meeting I am in the process of trying to move, and as with last year, expect a panel that features segments on Discovery with bonus Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, and Star Trek Picard. So it all kicks off at 1 p.m. Eastern, that's 10 a.m. Pacific for those of you on the West Coast, with a Q&A with Star Trek franchise runners Alex Kurtzman and Heather Caden. That will then be followed by a virtual roundtable read of Act 1 of the Star Trek Discovery Season 2 finale, Such Sweet Sorrow Part 2, including pretty much most of the Discovery cast, as well as some of the stars of the newly announced Star Trek Strange New Worlds, including Anson Mount, Ethan Peck, and Rebecca Romaine, and that will then be followed by a Q&A with the Discovery and Strange New World stars, but they are just getting started, as next up after that will be the voiceover cast of Star Trek Lower Decks, also including the series creator and showrunner Mike McMahon. They will also do a Q&A and will showcase an extended extended clip from the show's premiere episode. So no trailer for Lower Decks is what we're hearing, but an actual episode clip I think might tell you a little bit more about the show itself than a trailer would. And if that's not enough, finally the cast of Star Trek Picard will take questions, joined by some of the notable guest stars from the first season like Jerry Ryan, Jonathan Frakes, and Marina Sirtis. Given it's only a couple of weeks away from the premiere of Star Trek Lower Decks, that is likely the show that will make the most news at San Diego Comic-Con at Holmes Enter the Star Trek Universe panel, but don't count out the possibility of a new Discovery Season 3 trailer or some reveals for Star Trek Picard Season 2. Marina, what do you think you're most looking forward to from the Enter the Star Trek Universe panel? That's quite the lineup, don't you think?
Oh my goodness. When I saw, this thing jumped out, I think I saw Deadline's article first before it broke through Star Trek's official channels. And I was reading like, oh my goodness, it's like we getting the actual taste of San Diego only online. Super exciting. I cannot tell you which one. It's still a toss-up, I think, between Discovery and Picard for me, because I really want to know, maybe, like you said, maybe there will be something, hints on when we can expect Season 3, which is a long time coming, and we know that it's coming, but some news would be very, very welcome. And of course, just to see everyone who's working on Picard is always dear to my heart, because that's, I love the fact that this is continuation. I'm very much a TNG era Trekkie, so, what's happening next with Picard is certainly going to be something to look out for. And not to mention just seeing them again on the screen, that's always fun.
Yeah, it strikes me that we probably will not have the level of shocking surprises that we had at San Diego Comic-Con last year. Recall, that was the convention at which Jerry Ryan, Brent Spiner, Jonathan Frakes, and Marina Sirtis and Jonathan Del Arco were announced as returning for Star Trek Picard Season 1, which was just a massive shock for everybody there, and I think part of the reason why it probably won't sort of rise to the same level as that is because we are in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Star Trek Picard Season 2 is not filming, even though it should be. Things have sort of ground to a halt a little bit, but I do think we'll get something. I mean, I don't think we'll get quite that sort of wave after wave after wave of just extremely exciting surprises, but maybe one, maybe two. Maybe in the Lower Decks panel we'll find out a returning character in Lower Decks. Maybe for the Picard panel, they'll tell us another legacy character that we can expect to see returning. And, as I say, maybe another trailer for Star Trek Discovery Season 3. We've only had the one that was released, now 8, 9, 10 months ago at New York Comic-Con. So we're about due.
Yeah, but I have to say that knowing that we know about the creative team behind the Star Trek universe at the moment. So far, and we talked about this in previously, everything seemed like all the announcements and the little hints that would appear, this person would say this and kind of hint at that. Everything always seems to be so well choreographed and timed, where I think that even though, obviously, this is not the same impact necessarily as when something happens live on stage in Hall H and it just blows the internet's roof, they might still pull off a surprise. This is actually one thing that I am really thrilled that we get a chance to actually see this. So it's in the middle of workday for me, but I will definitely have that YouTube channel open and looking at it with the side of my eye, because who knows, maybe they will finish the Picard panel and then it'll be, a pause, and then they'll be like, and then who knows? Maybe they will break some news about Section 31. Huh?
And the nice thing is, compared to San Diego Comic-Con normally, unlike New York Comic-Con, where over the last couple of years they have gotten into the habit of live streaming the panels, San Diego Comic-Con is one of those you have to be there kind of situations. And if you're not there, I mean, you'll get, once they release the trailer that comes out afterwards, you'll get the chance to see it. But my San Diego Comic-Con experiences for the last 2 years have been sitting in front of my computer, scrolling through Twitter from people who are in the room telling me what's going on. So it will be really nice. It's going to be broadcast on YouTube for everybody to enjoy this year.
Which is why what I'm saying is I'm curious to see how they will adjust their usual MO to having this, a virtual platform rather than having an in-person explosion thrown in, news explosion thrown in. So I'm curious. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for a big surprise. still, even though it's a virtual thing, I am hopeful for a big surprise.
Well, it is only 2 weeks away as of the time of recording, so we do not have long to wait to figure out what the Star Trek producers have in store for us at the Enter the Star Trek Universe panel. And of course, we'll be recording an episode of Weekly Trek shortly after to let you know all of the news that we learned at San Diego Comic-Con at home. But we'll leave that there for now and move on to our second story this week, which actually flashes back for regular listeners to the fall, and a story we covered in, I think it was probably October time, about some comments by Bob Picardo, who'd played the Doctor on Star Trek Voyager, about the potential for a role in Star Trek Picard. So last fall, Picardo had indicated that he was maybe in line for a role in Star Trek Picard. He had told at a convention appearance in the UK that his agent had been contacted about a possible appearance in the show. Well, he's now walking that back. Speaking to comicbook.com, Robert Picardo said, "Well, I can say this. As of now, there are absolutely no plans and there is nothing in the works. I admire the show. I think everything is possible. I also know that the fans are a great driver often of what is done in Star Trek. We have not been driven to that particular point, so I'm not saying it couldn't happen in the future, but there are zero plans for it happening right now." Picardo went on in the interview to praise the show's portrayal of Seven of Nine and Jerry Ryan's return to the franchise. I have to say, when Bob Picardo said back in the fall that he had been approached about a potential for a Star Trek Picard Season 2 role, it did seem kind of odd, that he would be talking about that kind of thing. And it turns out there really probably was nothing to it. Marina, do you think the Doctor should be in Star Trek Picard Season 2?
Well, I have to be honest, I want to see as many legacy characters as possible. I mean, as they would fit into the story. Obviously, I don't want just cheap fan service, but yeah, it would be thrilling. I mean, not to mention that aside from EMH, technically speaking, I suppose Dr. Zimmerman, the creator, is probably still around, but it would be interesting. But I was surprised when I saw that, when I saw the comic book quoting him, because it, like you said, it was an odd thing. It's not like just something that you would randomly say that. As I said, everything seems to be very carefully done online. So, I mean, we only had maybe a couple of, like, when Frakes accidentally hinted on the mirror universe, I'm pretty sure that was a bit of a trouble for him. But everything else is they have their fingers out. They know the online community, that we sort of everybody's paying attention. So I wonder what that means. That the sudden like, no, nothing's happening. Is that also something that's kind of planted as a red herring, or does that mean something that the story? Because as you mentioned before, Picard is not filming, but they are working through. The writing room is busy working. At least that's what's been mentioned several times, I think, on Twitter. So does that mean maybe story went different ways, and that potential for EMH or Zimmerman making an appearance is just no longer working? I mean, I suppose we can only guess, and actually, I don't suppose the only thing we can do is guess. But yeah, it's curious. It's curious that it's just complete 180 all of a sudden.
Yes, Marina, all we can do is guess, or perhaps you might put it, theorize, and once we get to the end of the show, my theory for this week is exactly what's going on with Bob Picardo. So we will return and revisit this topic, and you can tell me what you think about my theory for why he said in the fall he was approached and now is saying that he was not. Well, if you are a Klingon fan, get ready for more Klingons in 2 gaming platforms. Both Star Trek Online and Star Trek Adventures, the tabletop role-playing game, are both adding big new Klingon products to their offerings in the very near future. Star Trek Online is launching its latest major storyline, which focuses on the Klingons, called A House Divided. Features voice roles for J.G. Hertzler as Chancellor Martok and Robert O'Reilly, who is playing a very funky-looking relative of Chancellor Gowron. It mixes together Klingon elements from every time period of the show, including Discovery and the TNG era. Meanwhile, Star Trek Adventures have announced their next book in their line of popular role-playing game supplements, and it is a new core rulebook focused entirely on the Klingons. This 390-page hardback release will significantly expand what players can do with the Klingons and provide new Klingon-themed missions and story content to keep players engaged. The new Klingon handbook will ship in the fall. Marina, I know you are not a player of either Star Trek Online or Star Trek Adventures, but for Klingon fans, this is a pretty good time, don't you think?
Oh, very much so. I mean, look at all that stuff, if you will. And as a matter of fact, I always enjoy looking at the tables, when both, I'm pretty sure Star Trek Online always has a table at STLV. And I think as Star Trek Adventures, when they were just announced, definitely were present because they were advertising the game heavily. And the artwork is amazing. So again, I'm not a player, so I can just comment at what I'm seeing. And this is truly impressive. Something I actually just noticed when I was looking this up before we started recording, that relative of Gowron's, the fact that he is bald. And that kind of makes me think of like once we had the bold Discovery Klingons, and then second season, all of a sudden there's hair, and the explanation was given sort of like when in times of war, the Klingons, at least some of the Klingons, would shave their heads. And I'm like, well, this is actually great. They're talking about the war of this, of this rogue Klingons, and he's bald. And this really, really nicely fits into this theory, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a fun tie-in together, I think, between the Discovery era Klingons and the TNG era Klingons, and it's fun to see the way that some of these sort of outside, some of these outside Star Trek products have sort of tried to do their best to reconcile together, the two different eras of Klingons that we've seen today.
Yeah. So it's marvelous. Whoever's playing, enjoy, because Klingons are always fun.
Absolutely. Well, our last story this week is a fun one. So Icon Heroes, who've done a few different Star Trek products recently, including a line of letter openers that included Emperor Georgiou's dagger from the Mirror Universe from Star Trek Discovery Season 1, are planning a reissue of a 2018 bust, which is based off of the popular and famous Captain Picard facepalm meme. So ThinkGeek, before it went out of business a couple of years ago after it was bought by GameStop, had put out a bust of the Captain Picard facepalm meme. So you could buy yourself a bust of Picard with his face in his hands. That's not been available for a while because, as I say, ThinkGeek doesn't exist anymore, but Icon Heroes are resurrecting the bust and giving it a new sculpt. The new piece will be limited to 1,071 pieces and can be ordered through both Entertainment Earth or through your local comic book shop. But wait, there's more. If one facepalming senior officer of the Federation Starship Enterprise is not enough for you, how about two? Because for San Diego Comic-Con at home, Icon Heroes is releasing a Riker version as well. There are a number of Star Trek facepalm memes, and the Riker one comes from the third season episode, A Matter of Perspective. Both pieces are limited to 1,071 units and will cost somewhere between, I think the Picard version is $90, the Riker version is $80. The Picard one cannot be bought from the Icon Heroes website. As I say, you can either get that through your local comic book shop or you can go on entertainmentearth.com, but the Riker bust is available from Icon Heroes' website right now. Marina, will either of these busts make it into your collection, or are you facepalming at the sight of them? I'm embarrassed at myself for having
I am
that.
somewhere in between, because when I saw the news break about the Riker bust, I actually thought it was a fan-created image poking fun at the Picard facepalm, and then I realized that it's the next one in, and I was like, I think I did facepalm. So right now, I'm not sure if I'm going to be investing in getting either one of the busts, but I have to admit that I'm hugely entertained because they certainly took it a step further. Like, I did not know that we had the Picard bust, and like how much can you possibly either improve or top that, and they decided to do Riker. So as I said, I'm hugely entertained. This is a fun thing. Obviously, when you get an odd one out, but then you start to get sort of a quasi-series of it becomes more interesting. I'm curious to see where they're going to take it, because facepalm is a rather popular gesture, as memes
Sure
prove.
is.
So we definitely have a facepalming Cisco, we have a facepalming Archer, we have the facepalming Janeway. So hint, hint, if somebody wanted to do a series of facepalming captains, I'm all for it. I'm actually, I might actually consider collecting them, because it would look like a really, a physical representation of the meme. But yeah, this is highly unusual. Let's face it. I mean, this is a pretty odd collectible. And it's funny. So, I want to see if they're going to top Picard Riker, if they're going to go further and do another one. I still do wonder why they made the choice to just do the facepalming arm and So, and then the rest is chopped off, because it does give that strange look to it where you look at it, it's like, I suppose they wanted to emphasize the face palm, but it's a semi-bust because one arm is there and the other one is not. Too funny.
Yeah, I think the fact that they're both missing one of their two arms is just a really weird choice. They've done it a bit better in the new sculpt because they sort of take the arm off at the shoulder rather than take it off at the forearm, which looked somehow even weirder. Yeah, I'm not sure these are ones that I will necessarily be adding to my collection, but I could see why if you were in I'm laughing because my wife is desperately shaking her head no at me. Don't worry, it's not on the list. I can see why if you were feeling whimsical, let's say, you might decide to pick up one of these, and and no judgment for anybody who does.
Yeah, especially now that there is a pair of them. So now it's kind of like, oh, it's a matched set. So, starting to look better.
Well, we know, Marina, that you will be waiting patiently for the Janeway version to make it into the
totally. Oh, totally. Yes. Oh, this is hilarious.
All right, well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, I and my guest give you a wish or theory we're nurturing about Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, Strange New Worlds, the future of the franchise, merchandise, conventions, etc. So, Marina, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
Well, a theory is basically what we talked about when we discussed San Diego. I think they will somehow incorporate a big surprise, because San Diego is it. That's your biggest platform, pop culture platform of the year, when all the big announcements are made, when all the big discussions are held, stuff that, literally has the potential to rock the pop culture world. So I think there's got to be something in that lengthy Star Trek universe panel set that will reveal something. I don't know what it is. I mean, I would love to hear something else for other productions, but I think it's a stretch, seeing that we are in current circumstances and productions are stuck. But I still think that they will manage to do something, at least, and I hope so. And I hope so, because then it would be sort of like, we do get some semblance of the big San Diego surprise that we normally get yearly now. As far as the wish is that the circumstances start to get better in, both United States and internationally, as far as the whole situation with COVID-19 is, it's more and more getting into a category of pie in the sky, but I severely miss conventions. So I'm thinking that, well, we're in July right now, so we still have quite a few months to go until December, which is where STLV is currently set. I do hope it happens. Realistically, can it happen? I'm really shrugging here. So it's a dear wish, but we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen. I'm keeping all my fingers crossed.
Well, a hearty hear to your wish. Yeah, I am praying and hoping and begging for things to change and get better that will allow STLV to go ahead later this year. But as it relates to your theory, one of the things I am interested is not on the lineup for Enter the Star Trek Universe panel. And I can already hear you saying, Alex, you've got 3 shows on the lineup. What more could you possibly want? There's nothing on there about the Nickelodeon show, Cough Cough Star Trek Prodigy, Cough Cough. And I would have expected that maybe we would get a little something about it. I mean, maybe, Kurtzman and Caden will say something in their sort of opening Q&A session about it. But that's another one where, maybe there'll be a little bit of news that they'll drop on that, because we really don't even know anything about that show. I mean, we technically don't even know the name, even though, the name has been leaking out left, right, and center.
Yeah. Well, like I said, if it's the San Diego always has that potential. And virtual platform or not, they still can drop some heavy news, so I can't wait. Yeah, it's going to be an exciting Thursday.
It sure is. Well, here's my theory about Bob Picardo. So when he had sort of made those comments late last year about Star Trek Picard, I had sort of been banding around in my head this possibility that, like, maybe he's just saying this as a way of getting his name in the news so that, people will talk about him. So maybe he will end up with a role in the show. And I don't think Bob Picardo is that, like, weird or mercenary. Like, I think there's a reason why he said it. He's very clear in his denial about a role in Star Trek Picard. However, That's not the only 24th century production that's coming up in the near future. We actually have another one coming up in just a little under now 1 month, which is Star Trek Lower Decks. I wonder, I'm not even going to label it as a theory, I'm just wondering out loud if Bob Picardo's agent was in fact contacted about an appearance in Star Trek, but that it was not to appear in Star Trek Picard. It was in fact a voiceover role in Lower Decks. The USS Cerritos, California-class starship from the late 24th century, sounds like it's a ship where, it's the least important ship in the fleet, so maybe it doesn't have all of the most technologically sophisticated, kind of stuff on it. Maybe it has an old-style EMH in the vein of Dr. Lewis Zimmerman, the EMH Mark I, or maybe the Doctor himself, since this is, only a couple of years after Voyager returns to the Alpha Quadrant, has a guest starring role in an episode. We know there are going to be legacy characters in that show as well. Maybe one of them is the Doctor, and that when Picardo was talking about this last year, it was actually Lower Decks, and he was maybe confused because he was only thinking about Picard, and then it ultimately got, clarified for him. But what do you think about that, Marina?
Oh, holy tribbles. This is brilliant. And this is so clever, and it really fits. I mean, in the sense that it can really work. Now, whether he was necessarily confused or not, but it could have been also a cleverly put sort of thing to attract attention, or rather misdirect attention. But yeah, this would be brilliant. And totally. That would certainly work.
Because he answers the question, are you going to be in Star Trek Picard? And he just flat out says no, right?
No,
so
yeah.
He's not going to be in that one.
Which is also not really saying much, considering that we've had Frakes and Sirtis and Spiner saying for almost a year,
yes,
no,
right.
We're not, nobody approaches, we're not doing anything, because they had to.
Right.
So, but totally, Lower Decks, it 100% it can work. Whether it's an EMH as a guest or as the actual ship EMH. This is, you know what? It hasn't even slightly occurred to me. I love this. This is brilliant. I am. You know what? Now I absolutely must check out Lower Decks just to see if you're right or not. Oh.
Well, we will keep our fingers crossed for both Lower Decks and for Bob Picardo. But yeah, that would be fun. I mean, he's a great character, and I think would fit in perfectly in the sort of comedy-esque sort of hijinks
Absolutely.
that Lower Decks
Considering
is
that this is an animated series, it's even more just the enormous flexibility that it provides to bring in the legacy characters. You don't have to worry about what the actors look at the moment. The voice is still the same. So it's a fantastic possibility, and wow. Yeah, you really blew my mind. I love it.
Awesome. Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Marina Kravchuk, for joining me today. Marina, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
You can find me on Facebook. My private account is exactly that, private. However, I am part of the admin team for the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group, so you can definitely find me there. And I also co-host Shore Leave, your Star Trek Convention Community podcast, with my friend Jesse Okando, both of which can be found on Facebook and on Twitter. And yeah, if anybody ever wants to talk about conventions, hit me up.
And you can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you'll turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Marina. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.